Welcome back to Axis of Truth on JNS. Why are Democratic politicians falling all over themselves to campaign with a guy who said America deserved 9/11? That's the question I keep asking myself after the UK barred extreme left-wing activist Hasan Piker from entering the country, and half the Democratic Party immediately turned him into a martyr. But of all the people in American politics, why is this sick person currently under investigation by the U.S. government over potential sanctions violations for visiting Cuba? Why is he the one that so many Democratic politicians are rushing to defend? As a reminder, this is who Hasan Piker really is.
America deserved 9/11, dude. I'm saying.
Well, my understanding is that the property owners who have properties there choose just not to rent it at all.
Yeah, kill them. Kill those motherfuckers and murder those motherfuckers in the street. Let the streets soak in their red capitalist bloods, dude.
Engels wrote about the concept of social murder. And Brian Thompson, as the United Healthcare CEO, was engaging in a tremendous amount of social murder, the systematized forms of violence, because of the pervasive pain that the private healthcare system had created for the average American. I saw so many people immediately understand why this death had taken place.
And yet, increasingly, Democratic candidates are not distancing themselves from Hasan Piker. They're seeking his support. And Piker isn't just some random commentator who made one bad comment years ago. We're talking about a person who truly believes in political violence, that it's justified. Someone who openly advocates for communist and jihadist ideologies. Well, who actually living the opposite values himself in the West with his luxury designer clothing and expensive capitalist gadgets. We're talking about a person who's repeatedly defended Hamas and made excuses for Hamas, a U.S.-designated terrorist group which kidnapped and murdered dozens of Americans on October 7th.
I think it's important to understand the historical context in which violent resistance.
There's no context for murdering hundreds of teenagers, is there?
Yes, I think
really?
there is. Yes, I think that it's important to understand the context in which violent resistance has evolved, whether it be Hamas or whether it be any militancy. These aren't barbaric monsters. That these are horrifying atrocities that they did, right? But that it is not coming out of a place of this antiquated anti-Semitic tendencies, or that they wanted to go out and do mass rapes.
By invading from the Gaza Strip into Israel.
Yeah.
Do you think that they were not motivated by anti-Semitism, given that they were murdering citizens in... No.
No.
That is remarkable.
And someone who's called Orthodox Jews inbred. But that's not stopping the Dems. Take a look at what recently happened in Michigan. Just weeks after the terror attack on a synagogue in Michigan, the Michigan Democratic Senate candidate Abdul El-Sayed not only appeared with Hasan Piker at a campaign stop, but he also refused to condemn Piker's appalling past comments. Then El-Sayed went even further with an anti-Israel podcast excusing Piker's repeated pro-terror comments and claimed that they were merely out of context. Now, I'm sure it would be a surprise to absolutely no one that El-Sayed has also peddled discriminatory tropes about Jews, insinuating they have some sort of supernatural power over the American government. In the aftermath of the attack in Michigan, he also responded by condemning the attack, but also Israel's attacks in Lebanon, because apparently that makes sense. Condemn a conflict thousands of miles away with no actual connection to an attack on random Jewish American children at a synagogue in Michigan. Sure. And this is the part I genuinely struggle to understand. If you're running for the United States Senate, why is this the person you want introducing you to voters? Why is that the audience that you're even chasing? If these are your values as a party, you are not representing what was the Democratic Party. You're representing America-hating third worldism that's rooted in this jihadist victimhood ideology. And unfortunately, that pattern is repeating itself in a slew of Democratic candidates right now. Look at Maureen Galindo in Texas. Now, thankfully, Maureen has already lost her race, but not before she posted a video in which she spoke about turning an immigration detention facility into a prison for American Zionists. Not Israelis, not foreigners, American Zionists.
When I say that I want billionaire Zionists in prison, that does not mean I want Jews in internment camps. So why am I getting a whole bunch of death threats and MAGA insults? Which actually makes sense, I realize. Like, MAGA and Jewish Zionists apparently are the exact same people. They talk the exact same way, and that's because MAGA is the developing Christian Zionism. That's how they want to create a religion state in the United States of America, is through MAGA, which that's the goal of Zionism, is to create these white supremacist religion states. So, like, I don't care what religion you are. If you are a Zionist, meaning that you believe that you are just entitled to land, or someone's just entitled to land based off of religious beliefs, and that you'll kill all of the Semites for it, then yeah, I think that you're a danger to humanity and belong in prison.
This isn't even a debate about Israeli policy. It's someone talking about punishing Americans who believe in Jewish civil rights, and yet somehow this keeps happening. Democratic candidates say something outrageously anti-Semitic or something that would have been universally received as something anti-Jewish just a few years ago. Yet, instead of being thrown out as candidates, the Democratic Party, which has recently been overrun by the Democratic Socialists of America, makes excuses for it. But it's getting even worse. Look at Democratic congressional candidate Adam Hamawi in New Jersey, who just won his primary. Now, Hamawi isn't just a fringe leftist, he has actual terror ties. He was a close ally of Omar Abdulrahman, the blind sheikh, who was later convicted in connection with the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. He traveled with him, translated for him, and was even a defense witness for him in his trial over the terror plot. In 1994, he volunteered for an al-Qaeda affiliate in Bosnia, and then in 2024, Hamawi volunteered at a Gaza hospital, which Hamas leader Mohammed Sinwar was hiding under. Of course, Hamawi claimed there was nothing suspicious about the hospital and that Israel was targeting civilians. If that's not enough, he also supports an arms embargo on Israel and opposed funding for the defensive Iron Dome. Hamawi is one of the most extreme examples, and yet he's one of only a host of Democratic candidates with seriously disturbing comments and a track record of dangerous and extremist associations and rhetoric. There's also Adar Kawas, a New York State Senate candidate, who said 9/11 is a result of American colonialism. There's U.S. Senate candidate Graham Plattner, who literally has a Nazi tattoo that apparently Democrats have no issue with anymore. And then there's U.S. congressional candidate Daria Liza Avila Chevalier, another DSA candidate who participated in the anti-Israel New York protests on October 8th, 2023 in New York City. The sad reality is that positions that used to exist primarily in fringe activist spaces are now showing up in congressional races across the country. And even Democrats are starting to admit it. Mallory McMorrow, a Democratic Senate candidate in Michigan, was asked whether the Democratic Party has an anti-Semitism problem, and her answer was an unequivocal yes. In fact, her own family has been a victim of it. Her husband, who is Jewish, was screamed at with an anti-Semitic slur while walking their 5-year-old daughter outside. That's a Democrat describing what she has experienced with her own eyes.
Is there an anti-Semitism problem in the Democratic Party? Ms. McMorrow.
There is. At the Democratic convention, an attendee yelled an anti-Semitic slur at my husband, who is Jewish, who was walking with my 5-year-old daughter. That is terrifying.
So if this is the case, why are the powers that be in the Democratic Party allowing this? Why are they acting as if those advocating explicitly for political violence are in fact a legitimate voice of Gen Z and the future of the party, like Hasan Piker? Because I think that question tells us something important about what's happening inside the party. A few years ago, appearing with someone who said that America deserved 9/11 would have been political suicide. Yet today, a candidate for the United States Senate sees it as an opportunity. A few years ago, talking about a prison for American Zionists would have ended a campaign. Today, it becomes another news cycle. And a few years ago, many of these positions would have been confined to a small group of activists. Today, they're the future of the Democratic Party, which begs the question, where the hell is the left? Where are the Democrats that love the United States, who believe that anti-Semitism should be disqualifying, whether it comes from the right or from the left, who understand that you can support human rights without making excuses for Hamas, who don't support radicals that are burning American flags? because there should be no place for those views on the left or the right. A healthy democracy requires disagreement. It requires debate. It requires people with different ideas arguing in good faith because they ultimately want the country to succeed, not because one side wants to destroy it in favor of third world jihadism. Hasan Piker hates America, and that is not what he's ever been offering. He doesn't want solutions. His political project is built on convincing people that America is the problem, that its institutions are the problem, that Jews are the problem, and that the country itself must have some sort of communist revolution. What I find most disturbing isn't that Hasan actually believes those things. After all, he's an ignorant troll who pretends that he has intellectual rigor when he doesn't. What I actually find disturbing is that politicians are now seeking his endorsement, chasing his audience, and treating him as some sort of credible ally. That's why I think the UK ban is actually a distraction and one he's trying to spin in his favor by, wait for it, bashing Jews. The bigger story here is that a major American political party is increasingly embracing people who would have been considered politically toxic not long ago, all out of a desperate attempt to get support from Gen Z, the generation most chronically impacted by the subversion efforts of China, Qatar, the Islamic Republic of Iran, and others via social media. If the party can't confront that problem honestly, it's only going to get worse. Sacrificing American values and the ability to debate civilly with the common goal of improving the country is an American value and a tradition that's worth fighting for. The fact that Democrats have given up on that is an extremely concerning indicator for the whole country. But this refusal to confront reality is not limited to domestic politics because, while politicians were busy defending Hasan Piker this week, federal investigators were unraveling something just as dangerous: an Islamic Republic procurement network operating through the United States itself. And the deeper you look into the story, the more it exposes another illusion Washington has refused to let go of for decades. They just don't get it. This week, the Justice Department announced the arrest of Jamshid Ghomi, a dual U.S.-Iranian citizen living in Newport Coast, California. He's the CEO of an Iran-based technology company, and federal prosecutors are saying he spent years acquiring U.S.-origin networking, security, and encryption equipment for customers in Iran, including those linked to the regime's nuclear and military establishment. In plain English, the allegation is that sensitive American technology was being procured through the United States and moved into the hands of the Islamic Republic, right under the nose of the United States of America. This follows similar arrests of other Iranian Americans who've recently been exposed working for the regime, and in many cases, they've been doing this for years, demonstrating the same problem that we keep seeing over and over again in America. This follows similar arrests of other Iranian Americans who've recently been exposed working for the regime. And in many cases, they've been doing this for years, demonstrating the problem we keep seeing over and over again in American Iran policy from left to right. Washington can identify parts of the regime's network after the damage is done. It can arrest and file charges and write a press release. But time after time, the U.S. has proven unwilling to deal with the larger reality, which is that the regime isn't a normal government that can be moderated into good behavior. And this is why American Middle East policy keeps failing. Exhibit A.
Are you talking about the son of the supreme leader?
Well, he's a part of it, yes.
He has not been seen in public. What is his status? Have you talked to him directly?
I do believe they have great respect for him. I see it. I mean, they want to get his concurrence.
Yeah, sure, President Trump. For decades, the U.S. has tried different versions of the same approach: pressure the regime, negotiate with the regime, sanction the regime, offer the regime a pathway back, look for moderates inside the regime, and then act surprised when the regime uses every opening to survive, rearm, repress its people, and continue building its networks, whether under Democratic administrations or Republican. The DOJ case is a perfect example of this problem. According to the Justice Department, this wasn't a one-time purchase or a small technical violations. Ghomi spent years exploiting U.S. financial systems, using front companies and documentation to move controlled equipment to Iran. That should force a serious question in Washington. How many networks like this are still operating? How many people have been warning about this for years? And why does America always seem to wake up only after the regime has already benefited? The BBC story on this case adds another layer because it places the arrest in the broader context of the regime's efforts to acquire Western technology despite sanctions. Because the regime doesn't look at sanctions as a reason to stop, it looks at them as an obstacle to work around. And if you've been listening to Iranians, Israelis, and people who actually know what's going on, none of this is shocking. What is shocking is that Washington still doesn't seem to have a strategy that matches the reality of the regime. You can see the same thing in the new discussion about frozen Iranian assets that was announced Sunday. Reuters reported that the U.S. is considering using frozen funds to help Arab states in the Persian Gulf repair damage caused by the regime's attacks. Now, while someone should make reparations for that, why would it come from the money that should belong to the Iranian people and not the regime? The U.S. has prevented Israel and the Arab states in the region from responding to the regime's attacks on allies in the name of talks. But what that actually translates to in this region, the non-response, is weakness. The U.S. isn't signaling strength by cutting off the legs of its Middle Eastern allies against this regime. Now they want the compensation to come from the funds that should go to rebuilding Iran once it falls. I won't lie, it's a valid conversation to have, but why is that the only conversation? Why is there not an equally serious conversation about using Iranian assets to help the people in Iran? Why is there not a serious strategy for funding communications tools, strike funds, labor organizing, documentation of regime crimes, and opposition infrastructure needed for an actual transition? This is where Trump has been far too short-sighted. Yes, he's been much tougher on the regime than many of his predecessors, and he deserves credit for understanding that they're dangerous and that the JCPOA was an absolute train wreck. From the beginning, however, I warned that the administration seemed to be looking for a Delcy Rodriguez figure from inside the regime, someone who could manage a change without actually breaking the system. But Iran isn't Venezuela, and the Islamic Republic is an ideological system built on repression at home and revolutionary expansion abroad. Iranians have been saying for years that the system cannot be reformed. They're not asking for a better version of the Islamic Republic. They're asking for an end to the Islamic Republic, and they're ready to die for it. And that's why the issue of Reza Pahlavi is important. You don't have to agree with every position he's ever taken, but any serious analysis of Iranian opposition politics has to acknowledge that he's the most recognizable and desired opposition figure inside or outside of Iran. Ignoring him or pretending that some regime insider can be engineered into a legitimate transition figure isn't a serious strategy. It's Washington thinking it knows better than the people who have been living under this regime for 47 years. They're wrong. And this is why Israel's experience matters. Israel understands the Middle East in a way that consecutive U.S. administrations have not. The U.S. is a sovereign country with its own interests, but on Iran, Israel has been warning for decades about the nature of the regime, its nuclear ambitions, its proxy networks that threaten the U.S., its terror infrastructure that kills Americans, and its willingness to use every diplomatic opportunity as a means to rebuild. Yet still, the U.S. acts as if they know better than Israel how to handle the regime. It's the definition of insanity. On Sunday, a former Mossad official admitted it openly that Israel had a phased plan designed to weaken the regime and create conditions that would lead to its collapse. Part of that plan was already in the works, but the process was halted when President Trump abruptly stopped the war. It was also President Trump who demanded that Israel stop striking during the 12-day war, and also President Trump who demanded that Israel stop striking Hezbollah in Lebanon, and also President Trump that demanded that Israel stop attacking the Islamic Republic in response for the most recent barrage and ceasefire violation. All of these steps are giving the Islamic Republic a huge win and making them think they have the ability to dictate what goes on in other sovereign countries that they have no business even commenting on. Trump loves to position himself as the deal maker, but these moves extend the life of the regime at the direct expense of the people of this region, from Iranians to Israelis to Arabs. But these moves literally extend the life of the regime and at the expense of the people of the region, from Iranians to Israelis to the Arab world. The problem with President Trump's vision is this. If the goal is to manage the regime, you're always going to be looking for deals, off-ramps, pauses, concessions. But if your goal is to rid the world of the regime and ensure it never threatens the U.S. again, then you need a different strategy, one that centers the people instead of the regime. And that's what Washington doesn't understand. The U.S. is very good at finding pieces of the regime's machinery after the fact, tracking procurement of weapons and sanctioning companies, arresting individuals, freezing assets. They can even strike targets inside Iran. But none of that answers the bigger question. What is the end goal? If the end goal is a weaker Islamic regime, then every few years it will need to be dealt with, and with even more bloodshed regionally and beyond. But if the goal is to establish a safer America and a better world without the entity responsible for the most bloodshed in the region, then maybe you should let Israel do what we do best. This is why the DOJ case is important, because it's not a story of one traitor. It's a reminder that the regime continues to adapt, grow, and exploit every opportunity in Western society. The question now is whether Washington will finally admit that managing this regime has failed, or whether we're going to spend another decade pretending that the next deal, the next sanction, the next ceasefire will somehow produce a different result. Wrapping things up this week with the good, the bad, and the ugly. Starting with the bad. This week, a UN official made a stunning admission after months of reports and outrage over bogus allegations of sexual violence attributed to Israeli security forces. Pramila Patten, the UN official responsible for the report that put Israel on the UN sexual violence blacklist alongside Hamas, admitted that she had never personally reviewed the evidence and would not even be willing to visit the detention facilities if offered the opportunity. Take a look.
It's not the responsibility of my office to do any verification.
Did you get access to the evidence that is mentioned in this report?
I don't have to access. I mean, like the information is verified with a very robust methodology of verification and documentation. I am a recipient. Right. I compile that information and I present it to the Secretary General.
Right, so I just wondered if you'd viewed it with your own eyes. Or...
No, because this is not my job. And even throughout the engagement with the permanent mission, I made it clear that I will not visit detention facilities, even if they offered.
Why were these claims being presented to the world before the person responsible for presenting them had even reviewed the evidence herself? Like, if you're the UN and you're going to place a country on a blacklist for some of the most serious allegations imaginable, kind of think that verifying the evidence should be the first step, especially when those reports generate headlines and influence governments and even are used to foment hatred against Jews worldwide. And that's exactly why so many people have lost any remaining faith they had in the United Nations. They are always applying a double standard to the state of Israel. When the actual person responsible for this report admits that she didn't personally review the evidence, and not only that, but refused to visit the facilities in question, I mean, how can you trust anything that they say? Once again, the UN's reputation for being the theater of the absurd is proven. And now for the ugly, a story out of Canada caught my attention this week, which is unfortunate because there seems to be no shortage of ugly stories coming out of Canada these days. The chief of cardiac surgery at Montreal's Jewish General Hospital announced that he's leaving Quebec after more than 20 years. The reason? Canada's rising Jew hatred. He said he no longer has confidence that the growing anti-Semitism in the healthcare system is being taken seriously. And what's especially alarming is that we're not talking about politics or social media or an argument on campus. We're talking about a senior heart surgeon who spent decades working in Canadian medicine and has now concluded that the situation is so bad that he wants to leave the country. Canada is in a shockingly bad place if this is what's happening to your Jews. Just in the last 2 days, there have been 2 different attacks on Canadian synagogues. What is happening in Canada? And finally, as always, we want to end on a positive note with our good story of the week. One of the most interesting things happened after Iranians got some internet back, limited. And what they have to say is very telling. They're not upset at the US or Israel for striking the regime. They're upset that the bombing stopped. While regime propagandists told the West that strikes on Iran will unite Iranians with the regime, the people had a very different message for the world. Are they finally ready to listen? Take a look.
We the people, almost.
The sad reality is that this is what Iranians feel that they need to get rid of the regime. And boy, is that a different vision than what so many so-called experts claimed. Remember when they spent months mourning that an attack would rally Iranians around the flag? The truth is that the only way to get anyone to rally around the flag is when they pay protesters to show up in support of the regime. But in any case, well, it's obviously bittersweet. It is our good story this week because the Iranian people are not done with this regime. And their resilience in the face of what seems like the entire world turning their backs on them is something that cannot go unnoticed. So we stand with you. To all the people of Iran, continue to hold on, and we'll continue to speak out for you. And that's it for this week on Axis of Truth. As always, if you have a story tip for me, feel free to reach out on social media, Emily K. Schrader on X or Emily in Tel Aviv on Instagram. See you next week on JNS.